Right, good morning everybody. Welcome to our very knowledgeable panel today. So thanks to our panel for taking time to be part of this today. I'm stepping in as chair. Unfortunately, the chair that was supposed to be here has got technical issues, so I feel a bit sort of dumped in the deep end, but we can do this together. The objective of this conversation that we're going to have today is a very important conversation, always has been, but I do think post-COVID, people are getting more and more aware of provenance and the importance of transparency in the food chain. And we as consumers now are all welded to our smartphones. We absolutely want to know as much information as we can. So since COVID, health and well-being, actually knowing where our food comes from, how it's been farmed, the well-being of the animals, in the catering sector as well, in ready meals, and we've got the right panel to address these certain issues that are facing us. And Steve Gardner-Collins, who's just set up Visit Gloucestershire, he's going to be joining us shortly. Unfortunately, couldn't be a worse week for him because he's just in the middle of opening up 5 hotels. So we don't mind him being late. We'll let him off. So I think the best thing we can do is actually go round and let the panel introduce themselves this morning. So John T, let's start with John T.
Thank you, Claire. Welcome, everyone. I'm John T. I wear 2 hats. I'm a farmer near Northleach in the middle of the Cotswolds, 180 acres, beef, lamb, chickens, pigs, little farm shop, wedding business, all sorts of stuff. And I'd class myself as an organic, regenerative, agroecological farmer. I farm with nature and sell everything locally. That's my passion. My other hat is manager or head of sustainable agriculture and food at Farm Ed, the Centre for Farm and Food Education near Shipton under Wychwood. And we're here to really try and move towards a more sustainable, agroecological, regenerative farming and food system through knowledge exchange.
Brilliant. Thanks, John T. And I've been to Farm Ed and it is absolutely amazing. So please Google and find out more about it because John T is doing amazing work up there. Right, who should we jump to now? Let's keep the farming theme going. Let's have a little word with Thomas. Thomas Gentle Farming, update us. What are you doing?
So I'm a farmer as well. I'm the 4th generation on our family farm. We've been farming regeneratively for about 12 years. And I found I learned about the amazing power of soil to store atmospheric carbon. And also by doing that we can improve the soil quality and the water and the biodiversity. But you know, the superpower of soil to store carbon is an amazing thing, and I've set up a carbon offsetting scheme for farmers to join and to quantify the amount of carbon they're putting in their soils and then to sell that as carbon offsets on the market.
Brilliant. Oh, thanks, Thomas. We're looking forward to learning more about that later on. That's exciting. Dominique, tell us all about you and what you're doing.
Hi, I'm Dominique Fern, and I am the founder of a fresh, sustainable ready meal business called The Wild Hare. Probably came about from conversations and understanding from John T's farm and understanding how farming with nature creates such a plethora of wildflowers and much more beauty to the land. So set up a ready meal business that had provenance. Not always local, regional. We buy all our grains from the east of the country because they grow better over there. And we have a QR code through Happily on our packaging that shows the farms that we work with. So we are British, nutritious and sustainable. Our grains are chosen because they are ancient grains and they're better for our gut, so we fall also into sort of gut friendly. We're also trialing a carbon receipt with our product, so when you buy our meal you receive a receipt on the miles that our product has come from, so where all the farms are, and back to us as the business we then have to offset that carbon with doing some certain projects like tree planting and different other things. So we really are trying to get people aware of where their food comes from, feed them nutritionally and do our bit as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dom. Exciting stuff. What a panel. And Sarah, last but not least, tell us all about your life and what you're doing and share your experiences with us because I know you're quite an interesting individual.
Oh, well, not sure about that, but I've done a lot of things in my life. My main thing at the moment is property and estate agency, and I've always been a really interested in cooking, and on a bit of a whim I entered MasterChef in 2019, got to the semi-final rounds, and I've always really been interested in, I suppose, how food is farmed, how that affects the flavour. So for me, all the fantastic things that have been done in the area, what really matters to me is how that then presents on your plate. And that's I started a food group during lockdown to get people cooking again, get people cooking from scratch. And actually, I think just from the response that we've had on that group, it shows that people do really care where the food comes from. And I did a beekeeping course a few summers ago, which got me interested in provenance and knowing how food is farmed, how it changes the flavour. So wherever the bees feed, it changes the flavour of the honey. Jersey Royal potatoes get their distinctive flavour because they put seaweed on in the fertiliser, grass-fed beef. I was also involved a little bit with Happily in the early stages, really because I was using Adam Henson's meat. And so for me, sourcing great local produce is really important. In addition to that, I've also opened a holiday cottage, which might be relevant to some of the discussion later. So obviously during their stay, I will give them a provenance tour of local farms and things, and also cook for them if they want me to during the stay. So cooking really has been more of a hobby, but it's now started to become a little bit more than that, because the more I looked into it, the more interested I became in it.
Brilliant. Oh, thanks, Sarah. And actually that leads nicely on to Steve Gardner-Thomas, who's Collins, who's not actually here yet, but hopefully he'll be joining us. But he runs 5 hotels under the Hatton Court Group, which is based, I think their main hotel is up sort of on the top of Gloucester, looking down over onto the M5. But he's very passionate about the importance of food to tourism and bringing money into this county. And obviously we've got a wonderful heritage with Gloucester Old Spot Pigs and double Gloucester cheese. Gloucestershire can really put itself on the map as a wonderful destination through its food. So hopefully he'll be joining us shortly. And before we just start the discussion, I guess I ought to introduce who I am, because I forgot about that. So my name's Claire Thayers. I came from a farming background. I was a young farmer, used to do my stock judging in my day, and married a farmer for my sins for 10 years, but managed to get out. But actually food's always been very important in my family. My mother used to cook everything from scratch. My friends used to come home from school and there'd be a pig's head boiling away to make brawn and making faggots on the kitchen table. So grew up with the importance of food, knowing where it came from, and done a lot in CSR. So sustainability is really important to me. So I'm enjoying this conversation today on many levels. And I currently work for a company called Happily, which is an organisation set up by a farmer who was very concerned that there wasn't a level playing field, that when we as consumers are in a situation, be it a butcher's or in a hotel, sat at a table, when we're eating that meat, do we really know where it comes from? Are we able to make an informed choice? So he came up with the idea of a QR code so that we can scan that with our mobile phone and actually know where the produce came from. That in turn enables our local farmers, or farmers full stop, to tell their story. So if they can tell their story, hopefully they can command that bit more margin to enable them to keep farming, because I believe food security for the UK is really important. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. As I said, sadly I can't take part in the conversation, so I've got to chair it, but no doubt I won't be able to help myself. I'll be jumping in for sure. So thanks to our delegates. I just saw Hannah joined us, so hi Hannah. So we've got Hannah, Jonathan and Alicia with us today. If the three of you would like to use the chat to put any questions that you've got, and then I can bring those questions to the panel as we work through over the next quarter of an hour and a quarter. Oh, hello from Hannah. Right, we'll get the conversation starting, and I'm actually going to start at the logical end, if you like. Let's start from the field and then we'll work through the process to the fork. So Jonty, I'd like to start with you, because I think we all eat, everybody eats. This is relevant to everybody. You know, a lot of the sessions that are going on Gloucestershire Business Show's schedule is quite specific, but everybody should be watching this, because we all make choices in what we eat every single day. So we as consumers need to know more about the field. We need to know more about what's going on in the farms. So, you know, where do you see the future of farming going, Jonty, and how can we as consumers support that journey?
Claire, I do like being the logical starting point.
You are a logical starting point.
Aren't I? Yeah.
Yeah.
Crikey, massive question. I'm going to start with I've never known such a challenging and overwhelming period in farming. I've been in this business now for 30 years. I grew up on an arable farm. I actually got out of farming when I was at university. I wanted to go down purely the environmental route because it was such a destructive industry, and in many ways it still is. But I came back to the industry wanting to make a difference, and I ended up being a farm conservation advisor for many years and a consultant. But it was steady. You know, we were spending billions trying to rescue farmland birds and habitats and do a little bit for soil and air, and then food started to creep into the debate maybe about 15 years ago when, you know, probably celebrity chefs made food sexy again. But in the last 5 years, I've never seen or felt so much change. And in the last 18 months, it is crazy. So there's so much happening. You can blame it on COVID, you can blame it on Brexit, but I think it's deeper than that. A lot of farmers like me and my father and my brothers and people like Thomas and farmers around the country know that something has to change. Our soils are tired. Our yields have plateaued or are going down. We're still throwing fertilizer and sprays at stuff to get decent crops. Our biodiversity, no matter how many billions we've thrown at it over the last 30 years, nearly all metrics are negative, whether it's farmland birds, whether it's invertebrates, whether it's bee populations, whether it's the health of our trees, our species-rich meadows, our water quality, our air quality. All those metrics are negative. At the same time, farmers are losing money. We cannot survive by producing food. Subsidy systems are changing because of Brexit, coming out of Europe, the Common Agricultural Policy. If that subsidy goes, 3/4 of farmers in this country are bankrupt overnight. We're calling it the cliff edge, and it's happening right now. The money is now being taken off us this year, for the next 5 years, going down to zero subsidy effectively. So most of us, including me, cannot survive without a changed system. At the same time, farmers are facing depression and stress because it's not always a great industry to be in. At the same time, our consumers are confused. What do they eat? Moving away from meat, moving away from milk maybe to more highly processed foods, more imports of food at times. At the same time, wow, we've got climate change and it is real. You know, as a farmer, we're feeling it every day, every season now. You know, we've just had another incredibly dry April. That's the 3rd dry spring in a row. Our grass does not grow like it used to. Our crops, spring crops, autumn crops, when are we going to drill stuff? Yields are all over the place. It's a real challenge, real turbulent time for farming. However, I love turbulence because it makes opportunity. And those farmers that are willing to go through the transition, ride the waves, maybe alter their mindset, work together and think differently, there's an incredibly exciting future for us. So the subsidy system is changing, this money that we rely on. There's going to be more money, public money for public goods, it's called. So that 3 billion that farmers get every year in the UK will all go into environmental payments. So you won't get paid to be a farmer anymore, you'll be paid to deliver environmental goods and public access and education and genetic protection and soil health. Brilliant. In carbon, locking carbon back into the soil. So there'll be some winners and losers in that system, and we have yet to see how that's going to really shape up. There might be farmers that make massive changes, change of mindset, do lots of great work for the environment, and they'll be winners. There'll be some that want to produce commodity still, wheat, barley, oilseed rape, white water, if produce lots and lots of milk, and trying to sell on the world market. And I think it's today we hear a little bit more about the trade deal that we're trying to strike. Is it with America or Australia? I can't quite remember. But there's going to be more pressure for big world trade deals, which won't go in our favour. We cannot compete at world level. So I think we have to be farmers delivering public goods and great local nutritious food. So lots of opportunities there. There's also this massive pressure to move to net zero. There's only 2 industries that can be carbon neutral, farming and forestry. So when your flight company or your car company or your mobile phone or Microsoft say, we're going to be carbon neutral, when Amazon moved to carbon neutrality, it's because they've asked some farmers or foresters somewhere to lock carbon in the soil for them. So it's in our hands, it's beneath our feet to make that difference and to hopefully link into that. I know Thomas will talk about that a little bit more in the future. So exciting times. Meat and milk. Yeah, people have been moving away from red meat and milk a little bit, that methane issue, but it's a little bit of a misnomer. Methane is a cyclical gas. Within 7 to 12 years, methane, the burping cows and the farting cows, goes into the atmosphere. It's a really bad greenhouse gas. But if we farm well, with lots of growing crops, lots of green stuff, lots of photosynthesis, really healthy soils, that methane cycles back into our soil. So again, we can have carbon neutral beef, lamb and milk if we do it right. But the pressure is on because methane is such a bad greenhouse gas that if we got rid of all the cows and sheep tomorrow, there'd be a massive drop in CO2 equivalents over the next 7 to 10 years. It would be a quick win for society to get rid of ruminants. But at the same time, we're still burning fossil fuels left, right and centre. So the big challenge is to decarbonise, to get fossil fuels out of our agricultural system. So that leads me to low input farming. Our challenge as farmers in the next 5 to 10 years is to move to a low input system, not so much artificial fertiliser, not many sprays, less carbon, to produce lots of good nutritious food locally that we can produce in our bioregion of the UK, but we need to market it. We need shorter supply chains. And we need help from you people out there to do that. And that's really exciting. The other slight change, just to finish off where the industry is heading, young blood. We need some young farmers, or lots of young farmers with new ideas and skills and mindset. So it's just been announced this morning, the government consultation on retirement scheme for farmers. Get old buggers out of the system like me. Will they pay us to retire, to rent or buy that little cottage in the village? Because that's often the barrier. Where do we live when we move off our farms? So there's going to be a big push to get new entrants with young ideas and entrepreneurial farmers into the system. Because land, I don't know if you know this, land only comes up for rent or to purchase 1 year in 200. So if you want that field next to your field or your farm or your house, you'd have to wait 200 years. I think we need to get that down to about 40 or 50 years to give new entrants a chance. So lots of changes, lots of pressures, lots of challenges. But the big thing for me is moving to an agroecological, regenerative future where we go beyond conservation and sustainability, where we rebuild soil, rebuild our biodiversity, enhance our nutrient and water cycling, and yet produce lots and lots and lots of really nutrient-dense food. And within that, just to finish, I think there's a slight move from agriculture to horticulture. We don't need to produce all that wheat, barley, oilseed rape anymore in that very commodity-driven monoculture system. There'll be lots more different crops feeding us, pulses, think about hodmedods, more market gardening, fresh produce and salads grown locally, not imported. And lots and lots of farmers are really interested in that right now. But it's complex. It's really easy when you grow wheat, barley, oilseed rape, but it's really complex if you're enterprise stacking and doing lots and lots and lots of different crops at different times and small amounts of it that you then need to sell. But that's all part of my regenerative future dream. And I'll stop there.
Brilliant. I'm so glad we've captured this on a recording. I'm definitely sharing that. That was amazing. And I think you're absolutely right about one of the biggest challenges farming industry has right now is that it is a way of life. People forget that, when times are hard, we'll just stop farming. But it's not like that. That's generations of families that have farmed. And the temptation is that they will continue to do what they've always done. So having young entrants into farming is really important. I did a lot of work with the Addington Fund, and they're doing amazing things where they will find properties to enable a farming family to retire with dignity and have a nice little property to retire into with a shed at the bottom of the garden, so they can continue to sharpen their chainsaws or whatever it is, because they're never going to stop working, because farmers never do. But this is a beautiful lead in now to you, Thomas, because obviously youth's on your side, as it certainly isn't mine, but give us an update, really. Just tell us a little bit more about what you're doing and the regenerative farming and how important it is to you as a young person to keep farming going and looking to the future.
I think that was very good, Jonty. It was a very good summary. Yeah, it's hard to know where to go from there. So yeah, I'm probably part of that next generation that Jonty mentioned. I'm 23. We've been farming in a regenerative way on our family farm for about 12 years. So my dad and my granddad made that transition. And yeah, before that point, we was farming in a very conventional monoculture, commodity-driven way, as many farmers still do today. But my dad and my granddad saw the light, I guess. Things were going the wrong way. We was having to spend more and more on artificial inputs and bigger tractors and moving the soil more and more. It was just, everything was just going in the wrong direction. And to be honest, in a business sense, we just couldn't make it work. So yeah, Dad and Granddad took the plunge. Probably, it was very early days for Regen Ag in the UK then. And yeah, they just sold all the big machinery we had. Bought the machinery that's necessary for regenerative, and they was doing it whether people liked it or not, really. We got a lot of abuse from neighbours, and still do, really, that we're doing the wrong thing and why are you doing that and that kind of thing. But farming is on a journey of change. But yeah, now we're in a position 12 years on where everything's moving in the right direction. Soil health is getting better. I don't think you ever really become a regenerative farmer. You're always still in that transition. You never actually achieve it. It's not a thing you achieve. It's a thing it's more like a movement you keep going on, and every year you learn something different and find out something new. And this year's a perfect example, really. So, really I started to look into kind of soil carbon offsetting in the first lockdown, which was kind of this time last year. I set myself the challenge to see if I could sell the carbon offsets that we were storing in our soil, because I knew that our soil was storing carbon. I knew people wanted to buy it. I just needed to kind of make a system that enabled that. So yeah, for my sins, I guess, I was a bit bored in the first lockdown, and I thought, right, I can do this. Let's have a go. Me being young, sort of thing, I guess. Bit naive, really. But then I've spent the last year trying to find a way to actually practically do it. And I've tried probably everything you can imagine, lots that really don't work, lots that sort of work, but I've learned a lot. And now in the last few months we've got this system. We're going to produce our first sort of carbon offset certificates in the autumn. We're signing up farmers right across the country, nationwide, literally at the moment. And yeah, it's this year's a very proof of concept year, but it's new technology, it's an exciting phase, and I think it's going to bring a lot of opportunities and hopefully give farmers that incentive. Like, as we use the funding that we used to get, farmers are going to be looking for a replacement, and if we can encourage them to look after their soils by storing carbon, then that incentive should hopefully create quite a big movement. And there's a lot of talk in the industry about it. Yeah, see how we go, I guess. Yeah, that was a bit of a quick summary, but yeah, does that make sense?
Makes sense. And I think what's really coming through from what John is saying and what you're saying, Thomas, is that we need to get that message out. We need to educate people, make them understand. There's still a bit of a disconnect between farmers who kind of work in their bubble and they don't realise that they need to tell that story to the end consumer so that those consumers can make an informed choice. So that's why Happily was set up. And we're actually going to a version 2, which we're working on at the moment, because all of that good stuff that you're doing, we want to include that. So when that consumer goes along and scans that QR code, not only do they know where the farmer is and a little bit of a story behind that product, but also all the good stuff, because sadly there has been a lot of negativity towards farming, and I think there is this huge opportunity to educate people, which leads beautifully on to Dom. So Dom, just tell us, I mean, you alluded to in the introduction what you're doing with your ready meals, but you actually use the QR code on your packaging to educate people, which is fantastic, so they can make an informed choice when they're buying your produce. Does that come with its own problems? Is continuity of produce a problem for you? Is it difficult to find the right farmers to work with? You're on mute, Dom.
See, I was doing the right thing muting.
I know. It's not often we get you to shut up, Dom, but that's very good. Well done.
Taking it back slightly, and the Wild Hare Group was absolutely set up to follow the methodology of regenerative farming, and how absolutely right that is. in farming for nature, putting back into the soils and creating a better future for our children, and everything's right. When we first launched with this product, we had an absolutely to the farm supply chain, very much more localized, and we could work with the farms that didn't spray, and we could put them sort of on this journey of 3 to 5 years of how they can capture carbon within the soils. And we wanted to set up a convenience product, because convenience food is by far the worst offender in food market space. And we landed the food, and straight away the buyers came back saying, "You're absolutely joking. The price point is ridiculous." So we had to work to find out how we firstly make a supply chain work, because we have a demographic in this country that believes that a meal with good food in it, good vegetables, British produce, should cost you no more than a cup of coffee. So we have a whole education on people trying to say, this is, you know, if you want something better, you need to pay for it. You then have, so these poor farmers are price driven, as it then will hit my supply chain. You then also got the vegan world. So, you know, we'd have, well, this is great, you've got all these meat. What are your plant-based SKUs? But not even caring about where these often synthesized food came from up against these other ones. So there is a lot of change in the marketplace, and there's a lot more that we can do to get those farmers to the forefront. What I would say, we're on a journey with the wild hare, and we are going to be creating, we have now a very, very good ready meal business that has British produce, that buys only from here in England, that can work with the farms, and that uses a consortium of buyers within the pulses grain world. The meat in it, for me, these regenerative farmers need to come together and need to create that same that we have in the pulses, because I have to make it work commercially, I have to buy from one buying group, I have to get the uniform product, and I have to get it into my kitchen to make that even work slightly commercially. I don't want to be pushing our price down, and I'm happy that we enter the price point higher, because I think there is a demographic, there is people that want to see a better product. But we need to get these good farmers that are doing the right thing, recognizing what that term is that they are, and creating some buying group that brings those animals into a centralized abattoir that then works with them and puts that through me, and I would buy from there. We are, you know, we've got some amazing places that our food lands into Whole Foods, into Selfridges. We're working on a product with the National Trust, and many of those farmers like John to go down that nature-based farming. So I think we're growing and we're getting that end point. But it is difficult for me to access those farmers currently, because they're all individual. So I would say to future-proof a business like my own, something's got to be done at that level to bring them together as a buying power. Like, and John mentioned them, Hogmadogs, which is an amazing example of British farmers coming together, realising they need better things going on in their soils, not the monoculture wheat, barley, growing these pulses, and I can then go into those, buy those. Yes, they're more expensive. Some of my plant-based dishes are more expensive than my meat-based, because they are, but they are organically grown and they're easy for me to buy in bulk.
Really interesting. So this whole supply chain debate, if you like, is something that we within Gloucestershire, we should be having those conversations and seeing what we can do to make it easier. And I think this leads nicely into Sarah, if you're happy to join in this conversation. So I've been waiting there so patiently. Food service has a part to play in this, and obviously being in MasterChef and talking to chefs and being at that end of the food chain, if you like. What are your thoughts in terms of how we can improve that supply chain?
Definitely, I think where Dominic was saying, certainly if there was a central place where I could go to source ingredients, I would certainly do that. And also, I think there is sort of a misunderstanding about sort of the vegan movement, because I know we're sort of talking of carbon emissions, and I'm sure the growth of soya, for example, causes more of a problem. One of the things I have noticed during lockdown, there has been a real change towards people supporting the farm shops and shopping locally, which all helps really. And I think people are genuinely really interested in knowing where the food comes from and how it's farmed and how it's produced. And, you know, I don't think necessarily it's down to cost. I think people will pay more money. I mean, I certainly would, to know where it's come from and to know the quality of the food and how it's farmed.
It's been quite interesting. We do a lot of work with the co-op at Happily, and they've done some research on this, and everybody's sort of hands up going, oh my goodness, everybody's going to become vegans. And actually the feedback from the younger generation is that far from turning to veganism, they actually want to be able to make that informed choice. They may eat less meat, but they're willing to pay more for it. And I think we as society have to accept the fact that cheap food, yes, of course there is a need for cheap food, but at the end of the day, we do need to be in a position where we can make that decision. You know, if we want to pay a little bit more and know where that meat has come from, then we should be in a position to do that. So as I'm sort of saying that, I've got a lovely question come in from Jonathan Jones to everybody. Extremely interesting points from the panel so far, and it seems the cultural and educational changes that are needed are equally as important, and the operational and technical developments. Given the importance of data and the digital supply chain, is there a need for open farming data standards to facilitate this? Right, I'm going to look to the farming team now. John T has conveniently taken a phone call. So sorry, Thomas, you've got to step in at this point. And I'm sure John T will have something to say when he comes off the phone.
No pressure. Yeah, no, it's a very interesting point. Like, I've spoken to quite a few supermarkets, and they it's the same as everybody. We all want to know what's happening down the supply chain. But the tricky thing is like it's easy in simple local supply chains when there's a local farm shop or even a local shop. But when you get to complex, large, multinational, importing ingredients from around the world supply chains, data is massively hard to do. And the other problem that I find, especially with our system, is probably a bad thing to say, but farmers are of the older generation, and they are much less technically adept at using these systems and data and inputting information, and all that kind of thing is kind of a different world. But I think as a new generation comes along, a lot of those systems exist, and I think they're going to get more and more adopted kind of by the younger generation as we can kind of find ways to use them more practically on the ground, because they do bring a lot of benefits in the field as well. So I kind of see that transition happening, but it's not a simple one.
John T, I'm sure you've got something to add.
Let's take that call. What was the question again, Claire? Sorry.
Right, so if you look into your chat box, we've had an interesting question from Jonathan Jones saying that it's great points so far. Cultural and educational changes are needed. Equally as important are the operational and technical developments. So given the importance of data and the digital supply chain, is there a need for open farming data standards to facilitate this? Good question.
Yeah, absolutely right. So where does the transition come from? Knowledge exchange comes first. That's why FarmEd is here. And it's often peer-to-peer knowledge exchange. Data. We still don't have enough evidence to show a lot of what we're talking about is actually working or has long-term impact. And there are always so many unintended consequences of change. Lots of people argue that actually regenerative farming, agroecology, organic farming is bad for the planet, because actually what we need is food produced in a lab in a factory somewhere with solar panels producing all our proteins to free up 20, 30, 40% of our land for rewilding. So there's lots of data and evidence and discussion and all of that. Open data, yeah, farmers aren't always keen on that. Yeah, who owns that? Big data and power plays. So for me, it comes back to knowledge, and it also comes back to provenance. Comes back to, I just want to say something about local. I'm a fan of local and seasonal, but local doesn't always mean good for the planet. I know lots of farmers who sell locally who are still destroying their soil, destroying habitats, farming intensively, but they use local. Yeah. So it's up to consumers to ask questions and to find out stories, and it's up to farmers to start providing good data. So if I, with my consumer's hat on, what are the safest marks or labels to look for. Yeah, local, seasonal, wonderful, get to know your farmer. But PFLA, Pasture Fed Livestock Association, or Pasture Fed mark is the only 100% grass-fed mark out there, and it's robust. I'd always go back to organic standards. It's the longest, 40 years of refinement, big set of world, European, UK standards, with lots of technical evidence and data behind it. There will be some regenerative marks on the shelves within the next 6 months, 1 year. Some are global and commodity driven and quite corporate, but there'll be some smaller regen marks coming very soon. And at that point, I'll throw in something called the GREAT project. We've just won a chunk of funding through the 30 Percy Foundation to make Gloucestershire the regenerative county. Hope I've not overpromised in that bid, but
no pressure.
But we'll be working with lots of farmers and food processors and throughout the supply chain on evidence build, data, knowledge and entrepreneurship around regenerative food and farming in Gloucestershire in the next 3 years. So hopefully, speaking to Jonathan's point, there will be more data. Whether it's open source data, I don't know.
Okay, that's really, really interesting. And thanks for the question, Jonathan. And Jean has just joined us as well. Hannah, Alicia, do feel free to add some more questions because we're never going to get a panel like this together again for a long time. I think something that's come out of that is that we as consumers should be asking the questions more. If you're in a restaurant, ask. Find out where that produce has come from. I think working with Happily, what we found is there are a huge amount of untruths. People will go into a local butcher, and because it's a local butcher, going back to what you were saying, Jonty, people assume that the produce they're buying is also local. And we've had cases where round the back there's boxes of frozen Thai chicken meat. Our farmers on the whole do their very best for health and well-being for their animals, and it just seems unfair that some of this produce is being sold disingenuously and that we as consumers don't know that. So please, if one message is to come out of this, start asking the questions and start the debate, start people talking about it because it affects everybody. So Sarah, moving back onto restaurants and chefs and tourism and all the rest of it, obviously our farmers are custodians of this beautiful countryside, and it's because of our beautiful countryside in Gloucestershire that we have so many tourists. And it's a shame that Steve hasn't been able to join us this morning because I know he really values all the great work that our farmers do to make this such a beautiful place to work, rest and play. Within tourism, are these questions that when people come and stay in your little holiday cottage, are they asking you about where the produce is coming from? Are they asking you where best to go and buy it? Are they thinking about where their food is from?
Definitely, obviously, the holiday cottage I only really recently opened, and the people that come and stay there are genuinely interested. I think it's more the questions that get asked on the food group. So the food group I started during lockdown, get people cooking again from scratch, to get people interested in provenance and know where the food comes from, and also when you sort of talk about the veganism side of things, again, I don't see that movement. I think it's a bit of a fad. I think some people are genuinely vegan, but ultimately it's about eating healthily, nutritiously, eating smaller portions as well. And I think that's what's happened with a lot of ready meals. I think women were busy working, trying to do everything, buying ready meals, huge portions, a bit like we get in America. And so I never deny myself eating anything, but I don't overeat. And I think that's perhaps educating people that there's nothing wrong with eating meat, but you don't have a sort of a 10-ounce steak on your plate. So the food group, definitely the people are really fascinated about where the food comes from, and it'd be nice to actually maybe have some pointers. I don't know whether, Johnson, that's something you can do, sort of a little bit of a guide really from the things that you were saying, because actually even something that you've just said recently, I was kind of unaware of, that you just assume that buying locally is always the best, and that to look for some of those markers, because people on the group are genuinely interested. I've got sort of like 6,300 members now on the group, and it's really built up. But ultimately, it's a cooking group, but it's also a celebration of food. So people are really genuinely interested in provenance and knowing where the food comes from. And most of the people on there will, make stock from scratch. And, to me, that's what I set out to achieve with the food group, really, just to make people aware of cooking from scratch and knowing where the food came from.
Really interesting, Sarah, because a friend of mine actually went on an all-inclusive holiday once, and because all the food was included and they perceived as being cheap, they had to eat as much as they could, so ramming it in.
Yeah.
And there is a point, and I'm going to turn to Dominique here. You alluded to it when you spoke earlier. It's about valuing our food. We can't keep expecting food to be super cheap, and actually, if we did value our food, maybe we'd savor every mouthful. Maybe we wouldn't waste so much, so it goes into landfill, which is absolutely crazy. What are your views on that? Do you think people, you said that you think there's a market there. How can we educate people to actually really value that food and think about every mouthful and stop wasting food? And, once they learn the story of their food, perhaps they will appreciate it more. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, the day that you can't walk into Asda and buy a chicken for £2.99 might help the whole of these conversations. But of course, we've got a huge food poverty situation, and quite rightly so, quite localized here in Gloucestershire. So we need to, I think Brexit and COVID will help people think about food locally, but if we are reducing those supply chains, then we can get people food at the correct price. And I think it's very important. And portion size, as Sarah said, and stop having that processed food. Think about the food in its correct form and utilizing it in that. And if I can do it with a commercial product and make sure there's no processing going on, then that the food will be there. It's just, we've got to understand, yes, it might be a bit more expensive, but yes, perhaps we just don't need to eat as many things as we can. But then you turn to them and people are spending their money on other things that aren't doing them well. So we just need to make sure that the food is more available of the better stuff, and it's not just perceived that this kind of farming should be for the elite and the lovely places like we have here, Dalesford and stuff. We need to make regenerative farming produce something that is available to everybody.
Brilliant. That's perfect timing, because look, Jonty's keen. He's got his hand up.
Some work here at Farm Ed with our community supported agriculture scheme, which is it's now a 5-acre market garden. We'll be feeding 150 families this year every week with fresh produce. We've compared it to others in the market, and it's £200 a year cheaper buying it direct from the farm through a CSA model. Some weeks you might get a lot of leeks or turnips and not a lot of anything else, but in the bounty months you've got wonderful produce. If you buy from farms like me, if you buy a box of beef, or you could share it with neighbours, it's cheaper than buying off the Tesco shelf equivalent sort of cuts. So there are ways of getting costs down. We've got a CSA bakery here now at Farm Ed, and we refuse to sell our wonderful organic sourdough breads, which could retail at £4.50, £5 for more than £3, which we want it to be accessible to everybody. There will always be a percentage of society that can't afford really, really good food. And I would argue that it's our job as a society to make sure that everyone is paid and rewarded enough in society so they can afford good food, and we help those that can't. Regenerative produce, pasture-fed produce, organic produce does not have to be very expensive. So actually it's less input.
Yeah.
The yields can be good. So the prices do not have to be silly money. The prices get silly when there's lots of middlemen in a long supply chain and there's lots of marketing costs.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah, you'd like to chip in?
Yeah, just from the point of view that also one of the things we try and do on the food group is look at, you were saying about if there's an abundance of leeks. Well, you can produce the different dishes and freeze things, making batch cooking so that you've got ready meals there, but also using all the animal. I think a lot of people have gone away from using all the different parts. You can make a really, chicken livers can be really tasty, kidneys can be tasty. The less expensive meats, if they're cooked longer and slower, can still be just as good. So people can still eat well. even if they don't want to necessarily buy the more expensive cuts. And I think it's educating people about that. It's going back to older traditional cooking methods that I think people have forgotten, because people just want to come in and pick things off the shelf. And I'm not criticising women. I think went back to work, they had the families, and I think there's a whole group, a whole generation of people that have missed out on those basic cooking skills.
Yeah, definitely, which leads nicely on to education, and happily have been working with the co-op childcare group, and Dominique, I know, has been involved in this as well, and they obviously, co-ops are very ethical, and they were very passionate about the children at their nursery schools knowing about where their food came from. And we started to work with their then wholesaler food chain, what's the word, Dominique, I'm looking for?
Yeah, the wholesaler, the distribution.
Yes, distribution. So we started to talk to them about being transparent and to open up and to tell us where their supply chains were. And it was a very, very, very big company. And they just said, no, they weren't willing to do it. Now, the lesson here to be learned is that Creed started working with us because they're a family organisation. They're very passionate about honesty. They've got nothing to hide. We started working with them and helped to make them become transparent. Now, interestingly, when the contract came to an end for co-op childcare, they put it out and it was Creed who won that business because they had their values and ethics, and it's being driven from the top down, if you like, into that supply chain, so that hopefully we will get this trickle down where people are starting to realize that consumers not only want it, but it's becoming expected. They want to be in that situation. So I think there's a real marketing opportunity for businesses that embrace this and communicate this. And as I said, it's a shame that Steve's not here at the moment, but he wants us to talk to their chefs and work with them and educate the chefs, because they're making decisions all the time about where their produce comes from. So I think and I hope there is a real tidal change now. And you alluded to that earlier, Jonty, when you started the conversation. I think people are expecting it, and I'm looking for my mobile phone. It's all down to this at the end of the day. So Jonty, I'm sure you've got something to comment on.
Yeah, just to say, absolutely crucial. And we're a venue now here at FarmEd, and we've got similar sourcing issues. So we're learning as we source as well here. But we're working with a number of chefs and chef schools. We're developing a CPD module on sustainable sourcing, and I'd love to involve you all in that as well.
Oh, we'd love that, Jonty, I'm sure. We're all going to have to continue our conversation once we're offline as well, because I think there's some real energy, focus and vision here with the people, and hopefully our delegates are little black boxes beneath by the pictures at the moment. So Alicia, Hannah, Jonathan and Gina, again, do feel free to chip in with your questions. So Thomas, just going back again, this all starts with the youth. This is all about your generation actually taking control of this and making decisions. What's the feeling amongst your peer group, whether they're farming or whatever? What's the general consensus amongst 23-year-olds right now? Are they thinking a lot more about where their food's coming from?
He's on mute, I think.
I think you're on mute, Thomas. Are you there?
Totally frozen.
I think he's frozen, yeah.
I think you're frozen. Thomas, don't freeze.
Let it go. Let it go.
Oh, well, Dominique, your children. Let's talk about your children. Let's go even younger. When we're talking to your kids, are they aware of food and where it's coming from?
Yes, and I don't mean that through myself, because I've got obviously a keen interest through it. Well, no doubt some of it, disperses down. But I think that children are more aware of how things, not just where it's from, but how it was grown, than we give them credit for. And also this whole circular economy. My daughter absolutely doesn't love buying new. She likes reusing. She doesn't like throwing away plastic and will make something from it. You know, that is her little bit of what she feels she's doing. So somewhere that message is getting through to them on how we need to help this environment. So I think we're getting there. Saying that, the amount of times that I always get told I'm ahead of my time, because we should, and I don't mind saying I was on the Dragon's Den just this season that's on the television now, and we didn't get the funding, and every dragon said that me backing regenerative farming and nature-based farming is ahead of its time. So, you know, we are up against it. But, and I'll say, you know, here in Gloucestershire and somebody leading it like Jonty, like the back of the Farm Ed, putting together a group of these farmers as a buying consortium, I would love to take that and prove that this can be done and be done on a large scale. And going to that, we've just picked up a new contract with the new way to buy food is through these apps, and they're not just in London now, they're outside. There's Deeja, Wheezy, Gorillas, huge amounts of investment going into them where they can deliver fresh food to you within 10 minutes or you get it all free. This is the younger generation buying this way, and our star food is doing very well in that way. So yes, I think there's a big marketplace, but it would be nice to make sure that we could deliver everything that these guys, and I would back these guys if we could get those buying groups together.
Brilliant. And Sarah, do you think that's something that Gloucestershire, the chefs, the whole restaurants, hotels, do you think there's an opportunity to almost have a sort of buying consortium that together we can buy more effectively?
Well, definitely, and I think people will come to visit the area because of that. But going back to the educational thing, I think the food technology, when it's taught at school, Provenance actually is part of the curriculum. So I do think children are, and the younger generation are being made more aware of it and the importance of it. But yes, certainly, I think the hoteliers and the restaurants and the chefs, you know, would be interested in a consortium, definitely, if they knew that they could go and source things, because part of the problem sometimes is sourcing things. And I think that's where sometimes some restaurants sort of cut corners and, you know, buy their beef elsewhere and claim it to be Hereford beef when in fact it isn't. And that really is a problem.
Interesting. And we've just had a comment here from Alicia, not a question, and I have to own up here because Alicia works with me at Happily, but not a question, but I have to say, since I've been really surprised since joining Happily about how much of the older generation, I guess I'm that, are interested in sustainability. I was always convinced it was just my generation, so it's interesting to hear how the feelings are mutual. Yeah, good. That's excellent. That's what we want to know. We want every generation to embrace. And as I said, that's why all of us have a duty to actually ask where our food comes from and just not assume. It's crazy. Don't assume, ask. Jonty, just looking to you again, this whole thing about local, I think it really is interesting. And after COVID, a lot of people have been going to their farm shops, etc. I live in a little market town called Pershall, and I found it really sad that there were queues down the street outside our Asda. And yet we've got a traditional old-fashioned indoor market. It's like a mini, well, it's not as flashy as Borough Market. Who am I trying to kid? But it's a little old-fashioned market. And when I go abroad, I love shopping in a market. I want to be part of that buzz. It's a social thing, talking to the vegetable ladies in there who give the dog a biscuit, you know, all of that stuff. And I think through COVID, a lot of people started to think about shopping in their farm shops, etc. So there is that desire to shop differently and not to buy two for the price of one, which, my goodness, it's madness because that all goes into landfill. And I think a lot of people need to understand that, as you were saying with the supply chains, what saddens me, and I used to work in packaging design, so I've worked with Marks and Spencer's and Tesco's and all the rest of it. Everybody says, oh, aren't Tesco's wonderful? You know, they're giving me something for free. No, they're not. That's being driven down, and the farmers ultimately are suffering for that. So these shorter supply chains can enable our farmers to have a better margin. So how can we in Gloucestershire, you've got the funding and all the rest of it, how can we get Gloucestershire to think about these shorter supply chains?
There's a number of things, and I'll probably start at the bottom. The bottom-up approach, which I'm a big fan of, I would like to see a network of pop-up farm shops working collaboratively. So one of my lockdown projects was a pop-up farm shop. Started selling our meat and then our veg, and then I added sourdough and honey and preserves, and Dom's meals made a special appearance, and flour from the mill. So everything, and cheeses, everything sourced within 10 miles. And it's a nice little roaring trade on a Saturday morning. And then I thought, what if there was one of these every village, every community, where we work together, we source together, we might share a chiller van, we sell some, we share some marketing costs. There's a few of us, there's a few mates of mine now looking at the same and started little pop-up shops. So that's one little farmer-led, very simple, low-key way of shifting local produce to local people. And that is also part of the experiential. You know, I get 30 customers in 2 hours on a Saturday morning. And I got thank you cards and presents at Christmas from them saying, thank you, you saved my life through COVID. And I just love coming up on a Saturday, and the food is wonderful, but it was about the experiential and the contact and the stories that we tell too. So that's a bottom-up thing that I'd like to see more of in Gloucestershire. Let's call it the Cotswold Good Food Collective, maybe, trademarked. Then maybe top-down dynamic procurement. You know, if I've got 5 tons of something and you know, the neighbour's got another 7 tons, and the NHS and the prisons click their button and bang, we can supply them through that dynamic procurement model, that can help things go to scale and involve a lot more farmers. The retailers, the multiples, the co-ops, you know, still have a massive role in this. We're not all going to suddenly go to pop-up shops and buy local overnight. So the multiples can do more, and I know it's not easy. I know that supply chain and that funnel is tricky, and I've experienced that with Domini and sourcing meat, etc. So for me, the answer is diverse. You need lots of different models doing lots of different things at local level.
Interesting.
Actually, Jonty, yeah. I didn't even know your farm shop existed, which I'm kind of surprised at. I don't know whether you know Simon and Sarah Wrighton. They're also happily transparent at Old Farm Dawn. So I support them wherever I can. It's a little bit a drive to Morton and Marsh, and I also try to go to Lambourne's Butchers and source my meat and things there. But I will come and have a look. You'll have to send me your details afterwards, and I'll come and have a look. But what I tend to do is whenever I make anything, and then I post it on social media, I'll tag where I've got it from, and I also am part of a group called Buy British as well, and I tend to post things on there. And there is a great support there on that group. You want to have a look? I think they've got about 30,000 members, and it's not just about food; it's about buying British and knowing where things are sort of made from in terms of your Hoover, and you know whether that's British or not. But that's quite a good group. But it's I think that would be a great idea to almost have one of those farm shops in every single location. I would use them. I would certainly. I mean, if you want to put something on the food group, I've also created a section for food producers as well, Jonty. So if you want me to put a little bit something about your farm shop on the food group, I will, because then when people, obviously they're not all in Gloucestershire, but when people do visit the area, so I was trying to create a sort of food guide really for all over the country. And so we've got producers on there. I think you did something, didn't you, Dominic, actually, to talk about your produce, your meals. You actually put something on the group.
I did.
Excellent. Again, I had a very interesting conversation with Alex Chalk, who's the MP for Cheltenham many years ago. And he was saying GCHQ is an oil well. I'm talking about the effect on the economy of thinking local buying, but the procurement team in GCHQ are using an intermediary wholesaler to deliver all of their milk. Now, interesting, they were bringing imported milk into GCHQ. And the lady who was doing the marketing at Cottesmore Dairy was saying, this is crazy. She said they have the audacity to ring us when they run out of milk, and our electric milk float drives in, delivers milk into GCHQ. She said, but if we had the contract for the milk for the whole of GCHQ, what a difference it would make to ourselves and our farmers. And so I think we've also got a duty, if you like, to lean on public sector in terms of their procurement choices, because it can make such a difference to our economy. So I've tried, and I will continue to try. So Jonty, maybe that's something as well we need to talk about, because public sector procurement, I think there might even be a project starting to work on that through Boom Circle.
Yeah, we should mention that. So there is a big body of work, the Gloucestershire Food Strategy. It is gathering pace. It is quite a big group now, and it is sort of linked in with the LEP, but maybe not strong enough. But the council's involved, and all sorts of players like me and Dom's involved. So yeah, that's probably the vehicle that this should go through at strategy
perfect.
level.
Yeah, great. Because again, I think that's something we've all got to be aware of. We're quite a disparate county, and I'm sure there's lots and lots of stuff going on. And that's why the Gloucestershire Food Strategy was initiated, really, was to avoid duplication. So it could be a bit more streamlined. And together we can be stronger. We can make such a massive difference. We've done an hour. I mean, I'm quite willing to continue this conversation for another half an hour, but I think it's a good time for me to ask Alicia, Jonathan, Hannah, if you've got any questions that you'd like to take yourself off mute and ask direct. They're all too shy. Just because you're hiding and we can't see you, it's much easier. Well, if we haven't got any questions, I'll sort of wind it up there, but I think what we ought to end on is something positive. So I'm going to put you right under the kibosh now. So before we conclude, just John T, what one positive thing can we do as consumers going forward?
Buy from Connigree Farm Shop and Dominique.
Yay!
I will, I'll be there.
And Dominique's going to say, buy my ready meals.
I only buy meals.
Okay, good. Right, Dominique?
I can't end on that one. That's rubbish. I think I just ask everyone, always ask questions and take responsibility for their food purchases.
Great. Dominique?
Yeah, don't think about always where it's from. Think about how it was reared, produced. I think it's equally, or if not more important, because at the end of the day, that comes back to sustainability. And if we don't have a planet for anyone to live in, it doesn't really matter what we're doing, does it?
Wise words, Dom. Sarah?
No, I think I've actually learned a little bit, because it's sort of, but certainly really the enthusiasm behind listening to both Johnny and Thomas. I know he's gone away now, but it's just nice to know that farmers are really looking at trying to change things, and that I also really don't think, well, I just don't think we should be vegan. That's I know a lot of people feel strongly the other way around, but it's interesting to see. And also, I think really cooking from scratch, eating a bit less. I think people, if we all did that, well, we wouldn't have the obesity problem that we have, for one thing, and the health issues that lead on to that, and the cost to the country from that. It's just eating well, eating a bit less, and knowing where your food comes from.
Brilliant. That's a really good point to end on. So I'd really love to thank the panel. It's been fantastic. I'd like to thank Thomas as well, but he's not here, so I'll have to drop him an email to thank him. I think he's having some Wi-Fi issues as well. It's been a fantastic discussion. Loved every minute of it. So thank you ever so much. And we will continue the conversation after this. Thank you.